Welcome to the Far and Beyond podcast, hosted by the Contracts and Fiscal Law Department at the Judge Advocates General Legal Center and School. This podcast is for the federal government attorneys navigating the complex intersection of acquisitions and fiscal law and policy. I am Major Ellie Sewell.
And I'm Major Ed Callahan. Together, we're your co-hosts for this episode. And on this episode of the Far and Beyond, we're going to discuss the history of the government purchase card and e-market evolution. And I'll tell you, I joined the Army in 1999, and we've had the GPC my entire time. It's just strange for me to picture a world in which there wasn't some GPC card holder in the unit being able to go out and get purchases for the commander at any given time. But I know you're a big history buff, so I figure if I shoot you this question, you're going to have an answer for me. What was it like prior to the GPC? And I guess to start with, when did we even bring the GPC into place?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I've had the GPC the entire time I've been in as well. And to think of how they used to do it before the GPC is mind-boggling to me, just to buy paper or pens. So they actually had to go through the procurement process for, now that we call them, for the larger items. They had to do the exact same process for smaller items too. It was historically cumbersome and time-consuming. So program staff had to submit a written procurement request to contracting officers, and then they would have to go get the necessary signatures and complete the required paperwork before then making the purchase. It was slow, time-consuming, paper-intensive, and it hindered offices getting the immediate things they needed.
So that's unfortunately exactly what I pictured the old system being, you know what I mean? And there are remnants of it in other areas of what we do. But I can't imagine having to go through the office for all that, for purchases of, nominal values just to make the office run day to day. That's crazy to me.
We need 2 binders, and it's going to take us 6 weeks to get that.
28 signatures. Yeah, perfect. So when did kind of the GPC come into the units, and I'm asking specifically Army, but Department of War, when did the GPC come into effect?
So it really started with President Reagan. So he started the program back in 1982 to help simplify and reduce the administrative costs of government procurement for small purchases. So part of this effort, he signed Executive Order 12352, directing agencies to develop programs to help reduce administrative costs and eliminate unnecessary procurement procedures.
So both me, your illustrious co-host, and the GPC were born in 1982. Seems like quite the momentous year for things to happen in the Army. So was it immediately in effect in 1982?
It took until about 1986. Several agencies piloted the use of a government commercial credit card, finding it to be more efficient and cost-effective ways to buy goods. So this innovation really allowed non-procurement staff to use the card directly with local suppliers and businesses, so they could bypass the contracting officer in that office entirely. This approach really reduced administrative costs and delivery time. So by 1989, the GSA was tasked with implementing the purchase card program government-wide.
86 to 89 is a pretty quick turnaround. Seems like they recognized a good idea while it was happening and gained some momentum.
They really did. So in 1993, the National Performance Review, a Clinton administration initiative, actually identified further opportunities to streamline government procurement. The NPR report recommended expanding the use of the purchase card for small purchases, estimating that if half of all the small acquisitions were made with purchase cards, the government could realize about $180 million in annual savings.
So it's funny, I read something recently about this National Performance Review, and it was Senator John Glenn who was a big part of getting this going with the Clintons, which makes sense when one of my favorite quotes from anybody ever is Senator John Glenn saying that as I hurtled through space, one thought kept crossing my mind. Every part of this rocket was supplied by the lowest bidder.
As someone who is from Ohio, I appreciate the Senator Glenn reference. But yeah, this... when you think about how we were purchasing things before and the things we did, like putting people in space with the lowest bidder, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, the argument in what I was reading was saying how lucky we were to have someone like Senator Glenn out there who is so well established in his reputation, in his ability to get reelected, and, in his general bona fides, that he was able to take up a cause like streamlining federal acquisitions, right? Because that's just not one that you can run on a lot of it. But he had the experience to know that it was necessary and the clout to be able to put behind it without needing to kind of distract with more flashy things. He could focus on the important things. So when they came up with the $180 million in annual savings, that had to convince a lot of people, not just Senator Glenn, that this was a good idea. Can you talk a little bit about what happened after that estimate came out?
Yes, and this led to Congress passing the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, or FASA, in 1994. FASA introduced a simplified acquisition threshold, or SAT, and the micro-purchase threshold, enabling broader use of purchase cards. So the MPT was initially set at $2,500 and then later raised to $3,000 in 2006. I think it's kind of crazy it took that long to get to $3,000.
I know, and the speed at which inflation was going on probably outpaced that, I would assume.
Exactly. So then in 2017, it was raised to $10,000, and then now, just recently, up to $15,000.
As discussed on this podcast.
Yes. And then FASA also raised the SAT to $350,000 just this year. So crucially, FASA streamlined purchases under the micro-purchase threshold by exempting them from the Buy American Act and Small Business Act requirements and requiring only a determination of reasonable cost. So following FASA, in October 1994, President Clinton issued Executive Order 12931, directing agencies to expand the GPC program and delegate micro-purchase authority to program offices. The FAR was subsequently amended to designate the GPC as the primary method for micro-purchases. So they really were pushing this credit card for these small purchases.
So with, I guess popularity or its use, did we actually see or realize that $180 million in annual savings that they had before? And, by the way, how are they measuring this annual savings? Are we talking about discounts that we're getting for using the credit card? Are we talking about the government keeping all my points and being able to use them for other things? When they say we're getting $180 million in savings, how are they coming up with that figure?
So there were a couple studies. These are both older, but I think they do show you, especially if you put them in inflation numbers now. But GSA estimated that there has been significant savings. So back in 1994, a study by the Purchase Card Council estimated quantified labor savings at approximately $54 per transaction. And then GSA reported similar savings in 1999 of about $54 as well per transaction. And they estimated that the GPC program saved the federal government over $800 million in 1998 and more than $1 billion in 1999 in administrative costs. So currently, GSA is estimating the program saves about $1.7 billion annually in administrative costs, but beyond cost savings, the program drastically improves delivery times and enabling offices to acquire essential goods and services quickly. We don't have to go through that long, slow process of all the paperwork.
Right. So the $54 per transaction, that's the measurement of the labor hours that it would take per office item that you were going and purchasing that now we're able to just do with one GPC card holder going out and making the purchase. That makes sense. So those numbers jump pretty significantly, right? And not saying that my value was worth more than $54 per transaction. I think that's debatable. But when you look at a $180 million estimate to, I think you said $1.7 billion annually now, was that because at some point in time the GPC was made mandatory?
Well, yes. So the FAR made it mandatory for all purchases under the micro-purchase threshold. So once that happened, the growth was substantial. So the dollar value of goods and services acquired with GPC soared from $527 million in fiscal year 93 to $19.5 billion in fiscal year 2011. And then by 2011, the number of card holders nearly tripled to 278,000, and annual transactions increased from 1.5 million to 22.8 million.
And that was 14 years ago, so I can only imagine that the numbers are much larger these days.
So we don't have complete data yet right now for 2025. So for 2024, fiscal year 2024, total spend was $39.7 billion on the GPC card. And then there was over 90 million transactions, which is about an average of 441 spent per transaction. And then get this, over 4.5 million cardholders are now in the federal government.
So that's great. And I think it demonstrates the usefulness of the GPC compared to having to fill out, in triplicate every form. And like I said, I joined in 99. I'm old enough to have filled things out with literal carbon copies on the back of it. But I also have to tell you, having been in command advising roles, having worked in SJAs, having worked at COCOMs, that there's still a lot of problems with this. And when you tell me that there are 4.5 million card holders, I almost jumped out of my skin for how many problems must be, because I'll tell you, GPC card purchases were a consistent problem for me. Was I just unlucky, or is this something that we're seeing problems undermining transparency compliance, problems undermining proper training? Are there things out there, or is it really just I'm that bad of a legal advisor that I have that much of a problem?
When you have 4.5 million cardholders in the federal government, you're going to have problems. You can't have a perfect system. Unfortunately, we can do what we can to make it better, but yeah, there's issues. So while, yes, the GPC really has saved in money, improved efficiency, we do have those, same issues when it comes to transparency, integrity, and competition. So beyond the numbers of transactions and total amount spent, GPC purchases are largely unreported, untracked within the federal procurement data system. Are we saying FPIDs for that again?
Just keep making them up. I like it. Ciao.
This lack of detailed data actually makes it really difficult to fully evaluate the GPC's impact on compliance with other mandatory sourcing requirements, support for small businesses, and then also those other socioeconomic goals that are out there. Really, one of the most critical weaknesses identified in an audit by the Government Accountability Office, GAO, and the IG was ineffective transaction review and approval by AOs. So this oversight allowed fraudulent and abusive purchases, including items like jewelry, home furnishing, cruise tickets.
That's a good one, yeah. I never would have thought of that.
Basically going unnoticed. So the same person who was purchasing was also probably approving or not getting those required signatures.
Right, and not needing a legal review because it was under a certain threshold, so things are able to slip through.
Mm-hmm. So obviously there's been some other issues like lack of separation of duties, like I just mentioned, inadequate training, excessive cards and limits, and failure to use mandatory sources. That's actually a big one. It's estimated that every 1 in 5 transactions fail to use mandatory sources. So think like Ability One. This has resulted in tens of millions of dollars in purchases that did not comply with congressional guidelines.
Right. So, and I think that's outlined in FASA, but I could be wrong. Just because you're exempt from the small business set aside, just because you're exempt from the Buy America Act, does not mean they're exempt from the mandatory sources that we've set up beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So assuming that Congress is not just learning about this from our podcast here now, have they taken any steps to try and address these problems or concerns?
So Congress did respond by enacting the Government Charge Card Abuse Prevention Act of 2012. This act established new internal controls and reporting requirements for the GPC programs to enhance management and oversight.
And I bet that immediately solved all of the problems. Is that right?
So no. A coordinated audit analyzing fiscal year 2017 data showed that weaknesses persisted. The analysis found that nearly 51% of sampled high-risk purchases failed to comply with at least one purchase card policy. So specific issues persisted, including the purchases with sales tax, since we're usually exempt from those, splitting transactions to circumvent single transaction limits. I've dealt with that in my own investigations. Non-mandatory sources, again, nearly 20% of GPC transactions improperly acquired supplies or services from non-mandatory sources, despite available mandatory source like Ability One, sometimes resulting in significant overpayments, such as a 565% overpayment for batteries.
Well, I'm not the most fiscally responsible person, but I still don't pay that much for batteries. So with all of these problems, we're talking about a 2012 act, then we're talking about a 2017 data study. Is the government attempting to modernize these systems to try and control for these errors?
They are. So there's been a new push, especially if you think about how we used to purchase things has changed. We're not going into brick and mortar stores anymore. Most of our purchases are done online these days. I think the federal government saw that and they're trying to capitalize on that. So one of the most significant changes is the creation of the new online GSA e-marketplace initiative. So this program allows cardholders to purchase from certain approved vendors, such as Amazon, Staples, and other online vendors. So this actually developed from Section 846 of the 2018 NDAA, where Congress directed GSA to evaluate commercial electronic marketplace options for federal procurement. So the intent was to enhance competition, expedite procurements, enable market research, and ensure reasonable pricing. Congress sought to determine if the federal government could leverage existing e-commerce platforms rather than developing a unique government-specific portal.
That makes sense because you'd take a long time to develop a site like Amazon, right, who does this for a living, is trying to compete for the best prices, is putting out these commercial goods. Why would we try and recreate something that we can just use and take advantage of now?
Exactly. So it really was, the primary goal was to open a commercial marketplace for micro purchases, leveraging the existing platforms to reduce costs, and then also collect more data on federal micro purchases, which currently we really haven't been tracking.
Like you were saying before, just because of the nature of the beast with these out there, there's just a lot or a lack of oversight with it. So when we're talking about commercial platforms with this, I'm going back to actually a couple podcasts that we've done where there were protections out there to make sure that what we're purchasing are what we should be purchasing, for example, right? But those aren't things that Amazon would care about, and I'm just using Amazon as an example here. So how can GSA ensure that they're meeting federal requirements like the cybersecurity and the enhanced procedures that we talked about recently, policy compliance, if we're opening this marketplace up in the e-commerce?
So these platforms still have to meet federal requirements that we put forth actually in the solicitation, including national and cybersecurity standards, socioeconomic goals, and data collection. This design ensures the capability to collect detailed purchasing and spend data for GSA, but also track compliance with socioeconomic requirements and mandatory sources. So concerning the security, the program requires compliance with Section 889 of the NDAA, which you may be familiar with, because this one prohibits the sale of telecommunications equipment or services from certain restricted companies like Huawei. All authorized platforms are Section 889 certified.
And when we talked the history of this at the beginning, you had said that they were exempt from, or the idea was the GPC purchases were exempt from small business set-asides. They were exempt from the Buy America Act. But we still have these socioeconomic concerns and mandatory sources. So how are they trying to enforce compliance with that?
So you're right. So micro purchases are generally exempt from those small businesses and the set-asides. So the market platform, though, is designed to display the size status of small businesses to enable better visibility. Purchases from small and disadvantaged businesses so purchasers can make more informed decisions.
Right. So even though it's not a required set-aside as they are in so many other of our acquisitions processes, it's still the preference that we're buying America whenever and wherever possible and that we're supporting small businesses. And so this helps them identify small businesses versus, I guess, not small businesses?
Yeah, so if you go on the website, you'll see they'll be clearly labeled, this is a woman-owned small business or this is a veteran-owned small business. So they clearly identify them so the purchasers can make that decision. But then there's also still the other mandates, and the big one is the Ability One program. So an essential feature of the e-marketplace is the ability to track Ability One items and notify users when a comparable item is available through the program. So helping agencies comply with these mandatory source requirements. GSA tracks the sale of Ability One items as a key metric.
I mean, that sounds great, right? Sounds like it's all coming together. Now, how far along are we? Or how far along is the GSA in implementing this?
So it started back in 2020. GSA launched a pilot program for GPC users. Initial projections estimated annual sales in the new platform would total about $6 billion. So the program has seen consistent growth. Spending increased from $12.5 million in 2021 to $40.4 million in 2022 and then $80 million in 2023, so almost doubling. And then in 2024, GSA launched the next generation, so beyond the pilot program, and expanded access to 8 online platforms. And it reached $96.9 million in sales and 350,000 orders. So this increase is probably due to the program being opened up to more and more agencies. Again, we don't have fiscal year 25 numbers yet, but there are currently 38 agencies who are participating in the platform, and they're adding more. I feel like every month I see a new name on it. The Army is one of them. The Department of the Air Force was not listed, actually.
Yet again, we're in the lead. Okay, so I'm thinking about SecWar's directive that we start building up our domestic industrial base. I understand that these are not subject to the Buy America Act, However, we want to keep buying American, right? We don't want to build up industrial bases in our adversaries, near peer or otherwise. There are 8 platforms out here. Is there any way for us to determine this has components made in China, this one has components only made in Ohio? Any way that we can help out to move toward or keep marching with SecWar's directive?
No, and I really think that's an area that the program could do better in. So since these purchases are under the micro purchase threshold, there is no requirement to buy domestic products. There are still some requirements to buy from certain sources, but only if those products are available. And the availability of tools to identify goods made in America varies significantly. So you really don't have the ability to only choose, I want to buy goods made in America. There's no tool for that at the moment. I think it's something they could put in where there's a search function or there's a tab that says buy in America, American-made goods, domestic goods, something of that nature. Because right now you can go on there and there's really no requirement for a country of origin to be on there anywhere. So you can be easily buying goods from Chinese manufacturers. And this is a good opportunity where they could create a good search function for domestic goods.
So I would suggest understanding the whole point of this is that we're trying to move fast, get small dollar items through this e-commerce site to commands. We should also take a little personal responsibility as the purchasers to try and make sure that we're not supporting our adversaries and that we are building up our base.
No, exactly. This program is a good idea, I think, just utilizing the e-commerce platforms that are already out there. We already have the GPC card. We can easily do it. We can buy goods for our offices quickly. I mean, how many times have we, asked our ed tech or secretary, hey, can you purchase some Post-it notes and pens, and how quickly it can be done now. But I think at the same time, looking at how much focus we have on overseas purchases, building up domestic base, and pens and Post-it notes, are they really that important?
Right.
But we're also, if the goal is to help small businesses, to keep the money here within the United States, I think there's a little bit of responsibility from the federal government to spend that money here.
I think
to
that's
search
right.
for those options if they can. So I would like to see this have those options easier to find.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely on that one. So for the last 40 plus years, we've seen this move forward from just replacing pen and paper to now having its own dynamic e-marketplace and trying to get what we need to our units faster with less paperwork.
I'll be interested to see what the 2025 numbers look like for the GPC card use and the commercial marketplace. Especially with all the talk about our budget right now. And then I think there was some freezes on GPC use over the last year. So I'm curious to see what that looks like moving forward. It'll be fun to track the numbers.
For some of us, not for all of us, but I'm glad you enjoy it. It's the benefit of this podcast.
And if anyone is interested, GSA does put up all of these numbers in an Excel spreadsheet on their website that you can go and look at.
I won't be, but I fully encourage a lot of people to go take their time out and do that.
Thank you for joining us today in this episode of Far and Beyond. Please make sure to follow us and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
Ellie specifically loves to hear from all of our listeners, so please continue to reach out to her on Facebook and LinkedIn and tell her what you think of these and what else you think she should be doing with her time besides looking at GSA's spreadsheets. The information can be found in the show notes for today's episode.
As always, the views expressed today are those of the presenters, not that of the Judge Advocate General Corps, the Department of the Army, the Department of the Air Force, or the Department of War.